Thanks to everyone for joining us today for our webinar, bringing technical and customer service, customer requirements together for building safety. Um, my name's Matt Carroll. I'm the Managing Director of Altair Property and Regen Services, and I'm chairing the session today. I am a last-minute substitute, and I do need to give Graham Hishma's apologies. He's had an unexpected family illness matter that he's got to deal with, so he's had to shoot off home. So best wishes to Graham. So why are we here? Okay, in response to the Grenfell fire, the government has taken steps to strengthen the regulatory expectations for building safety and how organisations work with their residents to communicate this, listen to their views and involve them in decisions that affect the safety of their homes. So we've seen a range of legislation recently, including the Building Safety and Fire Safety Acts, and most recently the Social Housing Regulation Act. And these all seek to address systemic failings, but ultimately mean that the sector needs to really consider its approach. So I think and hope that the prevailing message from today's webinar may be to just not simply comply with the legislation, but to look at the meaning behind this new regulatory environment and ultimately to do the right thing for the people who occupy the buildings that we're responsible for and who call them their home. So we've got four amazing speakers joining us today, very lucky, who I will introduce shortly. Firstly, I just want to kind of give an overview of how the session's going to run. Each speaker will have between 10 and 15 minutes. We're going to try and keep to that. Obviously, we've got to keep to time. Everyone's very busy. We appreciate you're all very busy. And then we will have some time for questions at the end. So please do use the Q&A function throughout the presentations to note down your questions, and we'll try and read out and get through as many as we can at the end. And do feel free to upvote each other's questions if you know what that means. I think apparently that means that shows what questions are more popular, which we can try and pick up if we can. So please do that. We are recording today's session, and this will be shared in a follow-up email over the next couple of days. So, and do also feel free to contact me after the session if you have any further questions. It might be that we can't get to all of the questions, so we'll follow those up. Okay, so without any further ado, I'm going to introduce everyone. So we're very lucky to have with us today Andy McGory, who is the Policy Lead of Competence and Resident Engagement for the Building Safety Regulator Program at the HSE. It's quite a mouthful. So Andy joined the HSE as an inspector in 2000 and gained experience of regulating in a broad range of industries. And he's currently leading on resident policy for the Building Safety Regulator and has spent the last 2 years working on all resident-focused aspects of the new building safety regime. Notably, he was responsible for setting up the statutorily required residence panel. I'm not sure I said that word correctly, but I thought, there we go. Secondly, we've got Dave Brown. Dave is a project and construction manager. He's been assisting Poplar HARCA with various projects for the last 9 years. He's been an integral part of Poplar HARCA's internal team in managing their cladding safety program. So having completed the significant part of this program, the same team has moved on to and adapted and taken up the responsibility for readying the organisation for its obligations under the Building Safety Act. So against this background, Dave is going to share some client experiences specifically on the development of building safety cases. Then we have Kevin Harris, who's the technical director within property and regeneration team in Altair. Kevin's a building surveyor and chartered manager. Kevin has worked in the housing, civic and military sectors. For the past 25 years, Kevin's career has been in housing, so he's got a wealth of development and regeneration experience gained across a range of project types, including joint ventures, estate regeneration, new build, refurbishment, conservation and legacy. And also we have with us today Anne-Marie Bancroft, who is Altair's Consumer Regulation Lead, utilising her expertise and excellent understanding of the relationship between landlords and their tenants. So Anne-Marie supports our clients to better listen to and act on resident feedback and complaints, prepare for proactive consumer regulation, and develop strong and meaningful ways for resident voice to be heard at a strategic level. She also supports our clients in ensuring that proactive consumer regulation readiness and building safety readiness is developed hand in hand. Okay, so I've tried to rattle through that to give the speakers as much time as possible. So I will now hand over, I'll stop sharing my screen and I will hand over to Andy to take us away.
Thanks, Matt. I'm going to share my screen. So I hope you can all see a PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, great. Slideshow. So that's me. Matt's just introduced me, so won't stand on ceremony. Why is resident engagement important? This is a new thing for HSE, really. We are not hugely used to dealing with residents. We have limited experience through our work in construction, gas safety, asbestos, Legionella, anything that took us to where these things were in public buildings, particularly quite often high-rise or social housing, but any building really. But we've been working with our Insight team on quite a few research projects to try and inform our limited knowledge. And they've done some really exciting work that's been informing the way we're going to work with this. And if I had more time, I'd tell you all about it because it really is exciting, but quarter of an hour, bit limited. So why is resident engagement important in the new regime? After Grenfell, it was clear that, and it came out in the Hackett report, the need to rebuild public trust in the regime, where residents felt that they were actually part of it rather than having things done to them. And that's the way it came out in the public inquiry. And Dame Judith Hackett in her investigation post-Grenfell. Talking a little more about Grenfell, the residents claimed they haven't been listened to over safety issues. And this came out quite vehemently in the public inquiry. There's been admissions about this during the public inquiry, that this was the case, that residents had valid points, but they weren't listened to. So Dame Judith's review mentioned resident engagement a number of times. She talked about rebuilding the public trust and specifically resident engagement strategy, that the residents must receive information on fire safety in an accessible manner, and that the engagement strategy must be in place to show transparency, to let people into the system, and to work in partnership with the residents so that they were a part of the new regime. The phrase that gets used a lot is to put residents back at the heart of the regime. So where are we going with the Building Safety Act? Every building must have a resident engagement strategy that's put in place by the people who manage the building. And I've jumped to the last bullet there, said every building, it's on an individual building level. It's got to be on an individual building level because there's different people live in each building and you've got a different audience, and with each different audience comes different issues and therefore different solutions. So you can have an overarching policy for all of your buildings if you've got lots of them, but each building will need an individual strategy. And what this strategy does is it makes the resident a part of the decision making on decisions relating to building safety. So that's fire risk and structural risk. They're the two things that the Building Safety Act cover: spread of fire, structural failure. Allied to the engagement strategy, there'd be a separate complaints procedure that can be talked about as part of the engagement strategy. but it isn't the engagement strategy per se. And I think it's important to say that this isn't just a piece of paper, as it's quite common with plans and strategies. You know, this has to be a living document that actually has a meaningful purpose. So part of that might be to drive change and to have some tangible outcome. So if there have been problems, that it might be a behavior change of the residents that you know is the outcome that the strategy brings about. So it's not all about just producing a piece of paper to tick a box. You know, this has to be a meaningful document, and that means top-down commitment from the organisations that are managing buildings and own buildings. So what are the principles of engaging with residents? I think this is a key culmination of a number of pieces of research that we've been doing in HSE, and they pulled together various bits of information from each of the research projects that have been going on. So it's key to understand who lives in the building, know your audience so you can respond to their needs. Now, I said different audience, it makes different issues and different solutions. Now, this might sound really, really simple, but our research shows that this is not the case, particularly with private rental tenants, and even more so now, the number of units that are put over to short-term rental, Airbnb, short-term work rental. So the people who are in charge of the building never truly know who is in that building, who are living. And we also know that private rental tenants are the least vested in what's going on in a building and the hardest to engage with. So you need to understand who lives in the building, and that could take a lot of effort. Engage via multiple channels. The research shows that it's not likely to be one size fits all. And there may be many different ways that you need to engage. It might be written, it might be through WhatsApp groups, it might be through social media, it might be through bespoke digital platforms. But whatever it is, it needs to be regular and repeated. Also, the research shows that face-to-face, don't forget the importance of face-to-face contact. And that might come in various different ways. We've got case studies from some duty holders where they've done it through door knocking, but others where they've done it by utilising a food bank that was on site, and you know, going to the food bank and talking to residents who were using the food bank. So people have had to be quite dynamic and transformational, I suppose, in the ways that they've been approaching residents. They've got to communicate the information effectively. It's got to be accessible to all. So that might need to be different formats, large print, you know, don't forget your alt text when you're doing documents, avoid PDFs, all those good things. It's got to be clear and it's got to be concise, because, you know, the message has got to hit home, and the audiences are very varied. You've got to listen to the residents, that feedback loop, make sure that you're making yourself available, that you've got the right processes to communicate, you know, your strategy and the important things that you're looking to involve them in, and make timely responses, because if your responses are too slow, our research shows that people, you know, are thinking that they're being ignored. Or if you're going to take a long while to get back to them, let them know that that's the case. Make sure you include everyone. So consider those with additional barriers. Again, we go back to accessibility, non-English speakers. We've done quite a lot of research work on non-English speakers, and particularly in social housing, you know, there are likely to be more people with English not as their first language. Similarly, people with disabilities. So those, I think, are the 5 key principles that we've drawn out of the research, that the various strands of research that we've been doing. And what makes successful resident engagement? That the residents are being involved in the decisions and therefore in the building safety. It's putting them back at the heart of the regime. But it's not just about compliance. Resident engagement is, you know, it's all part of a beneficial interaction, and this isn't the only thing that the people who are running buildings will be engaging with residents over. They may be engaging with them over other things already. And this additional interaction can generate social capital. You know, it allows for developing relationships, feeling of belonging, where people are getting involved in the communities that they live in. And therefore, you know, that there's knock-on potential to change the values and the norms and the behaviors. And through that, developing the feelings of safety and trust, which, you know, closes the loop on where Dame Judith recommendations started. So whilst there is an element of compliance, and it's what the Building Safety Act requires, you know, there's more to it than that. And, you know, successful resident engagement should have very positive outcomes for communities. I think I'll stop there, and leave it for the next person to speak.
Thank you, Andy. That's really good. It's some amazing pointers there. I've just kind of, yeah, in a way, it's all about that developing that trust, isn't it? That's a really key kind of part of that message. Thank you for that, Dave. I'm going to hand over to you now. I believe you're going off piste, so you're not going to be sharing your screen. So over to you, Dave.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. You can just someone give me a thumbs up. You can hear me, okay? Thank you very much, Andy. As I was listening to Andy speak, I've tried to tweak my presentation slightly to respond to some of Andy's points. So apologies if I go a little bit off piece, but I'll try and make it a more relevant follow-on. So I'm Dave Brown. I'm a project manager with Poplar HARCA, and the idea is for me to share a few thoughts about specifically the client's perspective on building our safety cases and safety case reports. So by way of background, HARCA have got 45 in-scope buildings, 40 odd in-scope buildings. A significant proportion of these are legacy buildings, so built in the 60s and 70s and adopted from the local authorities. Internally, our management team for this is made up of project and development managers, of which I'm a project manager, and not specifically technical fire safety staff. We have got one member of the team who's done a level 6 certificate in fire safety with the CIOB. That was a course initially designed for the building manager role before it was abandoned, and having that oversight of the legislation on fire safety, but without being a one individual specific discipline, I think it's proved to be very useful, and we'll touch on that in a minute. So Poplar HARCA have adopted an approach that we believe that we need to run this program principally internally. We felt from the outset that the principles behind the Act, and particularly the building safety case is to ensure that the organisation works together internally. All elements of the organisation work together internally for the benefit of the safety of all of the residents, and it's simply something that we don't think can just be outsourced in its entirety. We've obviously supplemented our team and brought in expertise from consultants where necessary, but and very successfully. But we've been determined that we want to own the process, and we want to influence how that process works, because it has to suite with the processes that we've already got. We've got an internal working group which covers senior operational management, which is resident communication, it's repairs, it's asset management, it's housing, it's health and safety, and it's compliance. And they're then working alongside the project management and built environment team that are leading. Obviously, the idea is that each of those sections develop their obligations independently, and then we bring together to support the safety case. Individually, I think the progress that we're making is really good. We've got robust processes, we're improving those processes, but I do think that there is a lot to be done, and it's something that Andy touched on. There's still a lot to be done to see all of those departments, all of those processes and all those procedures coming together to actually be the finished article. And whereas in the built environment side of the organisation, identifying with individual buildings is very easy. That's what we've always done. All buildings are different to a built environment professional, and so it's very obvious that you work on a building by building basis. But that isn't necessarily the case with other parts of the organisation, which are used to working on a global procedural thing. And as Andy quite rightly pointed out, that isn't necessarily the case. It's not necessarily the same. I mean, a really simple example might be the difference between a flat in the same block on the same floor. One bunch of flats may be on a dead end corridor. The other flats might be on a corridor with two means of escape, either end of the corridor. Now, the message that is going across to occupants in what they have to do in a fire, the risks that they face, and the attention to detail that other departments may want to look at, front doors, communal doors, those type of things are different. The regulation is the same for the door on the adjacent flats to a dead end as it is to the adjacent flats on two things. It's still an FD30S, but the risk of a failure of that is significantly more. So just in a really simple example of a front door, you've got a different approach for an individual flat within the same block. From a building information point of view, we had some challenges. We still have got some challenges. There's very little information we had on our legacy buildings. We started with trying to fill those gaps with gap analysis, and if I'm honest, in the early days we probably had very little idea about how we were going to fill the gaps, indeed what we actually needed to fill those gaps, and what we were going to do with the information when we did fill those gaps. So we probably wasted a bit of time in that regard. Now, this is the bit where I feel quite strongly. We can commission lots of surveys, and there are a plethora of consultants who are very skilled and very experienced in their individual disciplines. So it's very easy, albeit very expensive, to commission in-depth reports and surveys, FRAWs, fire risk assessments, level 1 to 4, mechanical electrical surveys, 3D drawings, structural energy reports, fire stopping reports. But when you've got all these, and you read them all together, it doesn't give you any clue as to whether your building is safe or not. It gets even more complicated on the legacy buildings, because those reports tend to focus on where it does or doesn't meet current regulations, which sometimes isn't helpful. It's possibly our fault as a client in terms of how we instructed people in preparing the reports. But now, going back to those 6 or 7 specialist reports, you've got them all, but they don't tell you whether your building's safe or not. Generally speaking, that comes back to the decision of the responsible person. So whereas there are lots of people out there who can tell you the disciplines, there are a lot less people who are prepared to say, I'm going to look at all of those disciplines together and then make a decision as to whether or not that building is safe. And, you know, some of the guys at the on the board here are some of the people who can do that. But there are a massive shortage of people within the industry who have got the skill set or the inclination to put all that information together and tell you what it means. Now, to me, the eureka moment came when someone said, how does your building work? How does it actually work in the event of a fire? And we got lots of reports and we got lots of processes and we got lots of procedures, but no one could actually tell me, putting those all together, how do you prevent the fire? How do you stop it spreading? How do you raise the alarm? How do you get people out? How do you get the emergency services in? And not just from a technical point of view, but from a resident engagement point of view. How do those things all work together? And once you get the message that one person, in our case, it's Steve, has to understand how that building works individually, how does it work? Then once you got it in my sort of fairly slow head, that is the mission. The mission is to explain to somebody very simply, how does my building work? Once I got that in my head, it became clearer what we're trying to do. I'm not saying it became clearer how to do it. Now, I'll just give you a couple of little specific examples there where something like, how does a smoke extract system interface with the fire doors? So you've got two different disciplines there, traditionally two different disciplines, and they have to work together. Smoke extract system, how robust is a smoke extract system? Do we know, for instance, if it's supposed to be a stay put policy and there's a fire and 50% of the residents have got a phone call from next door and they leg it and they leave the building, so it's no longer stay put, it's 50% stay put, 50% evacuate, and some of your door closers don't work, so 25% of those doors are now left open. Is your smoke extract system still going to work? Do you know that information? Little things like that, you can go on and on, but they're not linked to a single discipline. They spread across the disciplines. The safety case report, in my opinion, now becomes the tool with which we pull together all those information that we've gathered on the building and look at the way the building can perform in various scenarios, look at where the risks are, look at things how are going to escalate in certain circumstances, where the failures are going to be, the impact of those failures, and then how we focus on moving forward to reduce those risks. We've got a lot of that information now. We've worked quite hard to get it. I think we understand quite a lot of our buildings very well. Have we got something that I would say, in my opinion, is a definitively completed building safety case report that I think is adequately summarizes and articulates how that building works? At this point in time, I don't think we have. I think we're getting there. We're getting rapidly there, and we've got the information to back it up. But I haven't seen anything anywhere that I think a housing officer, a contractor, a resident, or indeed someone at distance at the HSE who's called in your building safety case report, looking at it, could actually read it and go, yeah, I get it. I really understand how that building works. I've read a very simple document. I get it. I understand how that building works. We're still developing that, and we will get there. But I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it yet. A couple of other things that I just wanted to share with you. And I think I'm going to change the order of it. I think the most important from my point of view is leaseholders. I think as an organisation, Poplar HARCA are great. They've got some very good processes. They're all surrounding tenants. So we, as we all know, as the principal responsible person, are responsible for all the people in that building, not just our tenants. So we're responsible for the leaseholders and the owners of the private flats as well. Whereas an organisation, we don't have yet a great skill set or resource in how we manage those leaseholders, how we manage the relationship with those leaseholders. We do with the tenants. We don't, and we have to develop that to make it work. So just some context on that. In one of our blocks, we've got over 30% of the flats dotted around individually, not on floors, not in certain areas. They've just been sold off, and they're dotted around. 30% of a 22-story building is occupied by exactly, as I said earlier, a mixture of private residents, Airbnb, absentee landlords, homes in multiple occupancy. Some people owning 1 or 2 flats, a lot only owning one. From what the lawyers tell me, we've got virtually no legal clout when it comes to actually insisting that somebody does something. So there's a big piece of work to be done out there, and our processes need to be developed. So a couple of other very quick points that we've found in this journey. One is there's absolutely no doubt that the additional scrutiny that our buildings are now under, particularly legacy ones, they're showing up issues that require capital expenditure. So there's no doubt for all our organisations over the next few years, we're going to be finding a lot of issues that require capital expenditure, and we've got to start planning for budget and resourcing to be able to deliver that. I think the other thing that I would say, having been old enough, or am being old enough to have been here when the CDM regulations came in, and we had to go through a very similar process to this, a new way of thinking and looking at the way we do something. In those early days, what we were doing with design teams and construction teams to meet the CDM regulations is nothing like what now is the accepted standard documentation, standard process. All design teams know, all contractors know that's what you do with CDM. It's just second nature. We're going to go through that with these safety cases as well. So the iterations that we're building now, I'm pretty sure that in 2-3 years' time will be very different. There will be lots of iterations. There'll be lots of changes in thinking. So again, as organisations, we need to be mindful that these are live, living documents that will be here for a long term. Will not only evolve because of the buildings and the people in the buildings evolve, they'll evolve because the regulations evolve and the processes evolved. And so we need to be ready to keep working on these documents permanently and keep working on these processes for the foreseeable future. So thanks for bearing with me. Hopefully that was of some interest.
Dave, thank you very much. You're perfectly on time there, so that's amazing. Good work there. Thanks, really interesting. You're obviously on the cold face with this. I think what you said about being on a journey. This is definitely where a lot of organisations are. Can I just remind people, if they want to put any questions as they come up, as people are speaking, just stick them in the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end of the session. Okay, so with that, I will hand up. I think it's a double header with Anne-Marie and Kevin. I think it's Anne-Marie that's leading this off, so I'll hand over to her.
Thank you, Matt. Yes, so thank you to the other speakers, and hopefully mine and Kevin's discussion now really complements what's been said so far. So in consideration of everything that's been discussed, I always think it's really important to consider the wider regulatory context to why we're here. So as Andy mentioned, the lack of listening to and acting on resident voice was really identified post-Grenfell, and identifying that, the government has put in a few mechanisms to try and address it. So this is what post-Grenfell changes for residents look like. I've not added all the technical elements of this, but it's the focus on where that relationship needs to change. So the government has responded with 3 strengthened regulatory bodies, for want of a better word, of the Strengthened Housing Ombudsman Service, the new Building Safety Regulator, and then for housing associations and local authorities, proactive consumer regulation. So the 3 of them are working together to be able to address some of the systemic failings, and they're coming out in a variety of different mechanisms. We've seen a lot of legislative changes, and a lot of the legislative changes haven't been done by priority. They've been done by the ability to change the law in particular areas. So for example, we see a really strong housing ombudsman service at the moment, but we've not seen the strength in the RSH as a regulator of social housing quite as of yet. And we've got the Building Safety Regulator, which is in its infancy in really understanding what proactive regulation of tall buildings looks like. As Andy's alluded to, they're still at a very much an understanding stage. So these three bodies are there to try and address the systemic failings of Grenfell, and they come with a variety of mechanisms. So we see mandatory engagement plans for high-rise blocks, that there's a need for residents to have a say about changes that affect their building safety, and the good practice tool that's a building safety charter, of which Altair's recently signed up to, but also lots of organisations, both landlords, providers, service suppliers like Altair, have all signed up to. We see the Strengthened Housing Ombudsman. We've seen a lot about the Strengthened Housing Ombudsman, a lot of serious detriment failings in the press, a lot of outward communication about that. And then we've seen the Regulator of Social Housing, and that's currently the look and shape of consumer regulation is out for consultation. Now, the purpose of this slide is not to just give you this regulatory framework in which that you've got to try and operate. It's to really give you a bit of an understanding about the purpose of that legislation and the purpose of all these regulatory bodies. And the purpose doesn't really sit the answer to the systemic failings of the social housing sector do not purely sit in regulation. They sit within the organisations that you work within, and they sit within the boardrooms and the cabinet meetings of which your leadership are part of. So to address the systemic failure, I think it's always important to take that step back and not look at these three bodies as things that you have to navigate and how you have to tick the boxes of the variety of expectations, that these three bodies are here to make sure that they get the best from organisations and that they do their part in addressing systemic failure. So I think it's really important. And when we work with our clients, we think about the entire regulatory landscape of, if you're going to do a customer engagement strategy, for example, if you're doing it to meet consumer regulation, then why aren't you considering how building safety fits in with that? If you're reviewing your complaints policy, how are you not considering the building safety expectations about raising formal complaints for high-rise blocks? There may well be some very difficult conversations for the sector. There's some perfect storm situations that can come out of this. So if you have a tenant living in a high-rise making a formal complaint about the safety of their building, technically they sit within the scope of all these three bodies. I don't think that these three bodies will give you the answer or the solution to that. I think as a provider, it will be up to you to find that answer. And so that's my part. I'll pass over to Kevin now.
Thank you, Anne. So in wrapping up the presentation, I thought I would spend a bit of time just providing some practical, high-level advice. So I hope what follows is helpful, really. And this is drawn from first-hand experience of being a client and now working on the consultant side of the sector. So I think the first thing to say is, to use that analogy of a journey, everyone joining us today will be on that journey. Understanding, engagement will undoubtedly be varied, but that's fine. Some will be more advanced, some thinking will be more mature, and possibly there may be a few people that feel a bit like the picture in the corner of the screen, still a little bit confused and uncertain. I think the important thing is, wherever you are on that journey, my strong advice would be proactive. If you're sort of embarking on the journey, be proactive, and if you're kind of already on the way, continue to be proactive. Whether you're a building owner, a landlord, or a managing agent, do not bury your head in the sand. Do not think, if I ignore this long enough, it's going to go away, because it's not. So where does the journey start? Well, the journey starts really with learning and understanding. I would encourage you all to understand your legal responsibilities, whether that's to the regulator, to your residents. It's absolutely essential as you move forwards, and it starts with the live one at the moment is the duty to register. So as I'm sure you will all be aware, by the 1st of October, you will all be required to register your high-rise buildings. And I'm sure you're all equally aware of failure to do so, what that means in terms of occupying buildings unlawfully. The best way to do this, in my experience, is really, engage with the material, engage with the guidance. That there's a wealth of information out there published by Andy and his colleagues at the regulator, thought leadership pieces written by technical consultants, lawyers, and the like. Be inquisitive, ask lots of questions, attend the conferences, the webinars. Find out what people are doing, because like you, they'll be running into difficulties as Dave has alluded to, in terms of finding information, understanding how people are navigating that and getting that essential information. What I find helpful on occasions is to reflect on, almost de-engineer it, reflect on where you want to get to. So what do you want to achieve? How do you want to get there? Who are you going to need to help you? Visualize what success looks like. It features at the bottom of the slide, but I'll mention it now. Put yourself in their shoes. Put yourself in the shoes of the regulator, in the shoes of your residents, and ask yourself, what level of information would I require? What level of information would be reassuring, would allay my concerns? If you adopt that mantra, you won't go too far wrong. One thing I would say, as Dave's really touched on, is a methodical approach is absolutely essential, regardless of, as I say, whether you're a building owner or a landlord. You will have a diverse and varied portfolio, and within that portfolio, there will be buildings and blocks that will have a different risk profile. So a risk-based approach will stand you in good stead. Once you understand the risk profile of your stock, as Dave has touched on, as Poplar HARCA are doing, approach it on a risk basis. Start with a higher risk and methodically work your way through until you get to the sort of medium and the low risk. And the one thing that's worth emphasizing here is, these are foundations. At the moment, the focus is very much on buildings over 18 meters, but as a sector, we know that the 11 to 18 meter buildings are on the horizon. That is not in doubt. The only issue that's still to be confirmed is the timing. And the other question that then flows from that is, what next? It may possibly be specialist housing, sheltered housing after that. So the foundations that you put in place now will organisationally stand you in good stead in the future. I suppose if there's one thing I would urge you to take away from today, it's this: it's absolutely essential that whether you work for a local authority, a registered provider, or another organisation, your corporate response should be cross-functional, cross-departmental. Under no circumstances should you be working in a silo. If you are, then that will be your downfall. Property development, neighbourhoods, housing, asset management, as Dave's touched on, you need to be working collaboratively together. The other piece of information is this: treat your information like it's gold dust. After your employees, it is without question the most valuable asset you have. You need to know and you need to own that information. You need to catalogue what you've got, but equally, you need to catalogue, you need to understand what you don't have. It will be your golden thread. If, like some of us, some of your information is still paper-based, don't waste any time digitising it, and think about investing in an asset information management system. There's a number on the market. Dynamic Aim's one of them, but not only does it handle big data in its stride, but it will also make your life a lot easier moving forwards, and it will also provide additional confidence and assurance to senior colleagues in terms of improved reporting and dashboarding capability. There may be some of you thinking, well, that's all very well and good, but our information leaves a little bit to be desired. You're not alone. Everybody's information has gaps in it, but it's how you face into it and how you respond. So undertake a gap analysis, understand what you've got, what you haven't got. Ask yourself the question, how material is it? You know, is it essential or is it desirable? If the answer is it's essential, and as Dave's touched on, you're going to need it for your building safety case, then how do you go about obtaining it? You know, there are options. Whatever you do, don't throw flash drives and hard drives into drawers. And I'm showing my age now. Don't use the DVD as a coaster for your coffee mug. I've seen it, so avoid doing that. And I suppose finally, you know, as colleagues have said, you know, keep it simple. Do you understand it? If you don't understand it, how do you sell it to the regulator, to senior colleagues? You know, regardless of the audience, you know, ensure the information is focused and it's easy to understand, and wherever possible, avoid the jargon. I know I'm guilty of it. You know, ask yourself, does it reassure you? Does it provide confidence? Does it demonstrate? That's the key thing. Does it demonstrate? I was with someone recently, and quite innocently, they said, well, no, we're reassured about that. That's not a problem. Now, I'm sure that is the case. But if you can't demonstrate it to the regulator's satisfaction, then it needs to be on your corporate risk register and you need to be working through it. So I'm hoping that's helpful. Appreciate covered a lot of ground there. But what I would say is, you know, Anne-Marie and I, Dave, Andy, you know, we're all contactable. You know, we're here to help. So, you know, if you've got any questions, ask them now, or alternatively, reach out afterwards. Matt, back to you.
Great stuff. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Anne-Marie. And thank you, Anne-Marie, for sharing what looked like your brain probably on your slide that you had there. So we've got a few minutes left. I think Andy has been diligently answering questions as we've been going through the process. So that's amazing. If you want to have a look at those questions and see the responses, Andy's actually put links in and everything. So it's very, very efficiently dealt with. I did have a question for Andy, actually, if I could ask this. So it's in relation to engagement being quite difficult to evidence. So has the HSE made any considerations as to how organisations can evidence how they deliver sort of really good communications and engagements?
Thanks, Matt. There's going to be some case studies published, and I think that we're going to publish a sort of plan of how we're going to evaluate the engagement strategy. But what I would say is, and it's been much talked about, is what makes an effective engagement strategy. And I said about box ticking exercise. I think, you know, if you want to demonstrate that it's not a box ticking exercise, then it is going to be about demonstrating outcomes and perhaps behavior changes and those things that I talked about, that they'll show truly effective resident engagement, where you can go, we had this problem, we wanted to involve them in this way, and this was the tangible outcome. I'm not saying that everyone has to have a tangible outcome, because to have a tangible outcome, you need to be able to effectively engage with residents. And we know that in itself is not the easiest thing in the world to do. We've spoken to some, you know, particularly social housing providers who've put a huge amount of resource and effort into trying to engage and getting very minimal return for it. So, you know, the first hurdle's got to be the successful engagement, and then from that is going to be demonstrating maybe some outcomes. but that might be really difficult, and that might be a few years down the line.
Thanks, Andy. That's really, really helpful. Listen, I'm just going to very quickly move on because we've got a couple of questions. I'd quite like to get them in if we can before we finish up. We've had Mel Key's question to Dave on your FD30s point. Has there been any consideration from your asset team to move to FD60 with smoke prevention, in particular with respect to new build flatted developments?
Okay, I'm afraid I'm not in a position to answer that. Firstly, because I don't have any involvement in the new build project, and secondly, I think we'd be very pleased if every single one of our doors in every single one of our flats, including all our leaseholders, was a fully functional FD30S. There are plenty of places where risk of those doors is very specific, then yes, they have been upgraded to FD60s. And I'm thinking of one particular a single staircase 22-story block where it is all about the front doors, and particularly front doors that open into lift lobbies, which you wouldn't have these days. The requirement is only for an FD30, but we've got FD60s on just from a risk assessed point of view.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dave. Quick question, Sue Prowse. We've put together a resident approved approach towards the resident engagement strategies for each 18-metre plus block, and just about to go out and run some engagement events. What we have so far is a template, but we need to develop this further. And then, are there any good practice examples of this? So good practice examples of templates for resident engagement, effectively resident engagement events, I think, isn't it? Yeah, to use at resident engagement events. So I'm maybe that's something. I don't know if Andy has any comment on that.
And we've resisted so far producing any templates for anything resident engagement related, because it's commonly asked for, but as soon as you start producing templates, people start going, that's how it's got to be done. And the very nature of what we're dealing with here is it's individual to the building. It's going to be different in every case. So we've resisted that. There will be some case studies published on the campaign, the BSR campaign microsite, but I don't think they're there yet.
Great stuff. Thank you, Andy. It's really helpful. Okay, I think it's 4 minutes to. I think we'll probably call that an end. Just waiting to see if there's any very final questions come through. But by all means, if anything comes through, if you want any anything, just make contact with me. I'll channel it into the right place. So if anything occurs to you later in the day, please do make contact. Thank you all for joining us on this. It's been brilliant. Thank you to the panel. Really, really appreciate you all devoting your time to this. You know, all busy people. So thank you so much for that. There's been some great help, some great advice, and great tips. I think we will be doing all of the. I think we'll be circulating slides. I believe so. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's going to be happening, and Jodie will be sorting that out. So hopefully this will be something that you can learn from and take away. So without wanting to hang on any longer, thank you very much, and see you all on the next one. Thank you.
Everyone.